best panel session today. We've got some fun questions for these guys. So I'm going to do my best to stay on script just for the first part. Usually they don't give me a script when I'm doing the weather. So, but I am. You'll likely most to see me on the weekend evening, so the 6 to 6:30 and our 11 o'clock newscast on ABC and NBC here in Jacksonville. So very happy to be a part of this. So today's panel discussions are going to focus on 4 main themes relating to the overall theme of the State of Reserve, of course, the art of science in our community. So the art of science is intended to explore the ways in which we make decisions as individuals and communities, while the science and research to inform those decisions is continually investigated. So the 4 main things that we're going to ask questions on are the communication to the public, making decisions without firm science, community preparedness and response, and then also storm economic impacts, which we've had a couple of those in the past couple of years, right? So following the sessions, we'll ask questions for the folks, and I think even after, maybe a couple questions if people have, want to interact with us as well. So let's get to know our panelists. This is where the script really comes in handy, because you guys have impressive bios. So Dr. Bill Daly is an associate professor of civil and coastal engineering at UNF. He's been a coastal engineer for nearly 35 years and specializes in coastal physical processes and engineering. Thanks for being here. Dr. Todd Osborne is an assistant professor of biogeochemistry at the greatest university, excuse me, at the Whitney Laboratory of Marine Bioscience and Marineland. His laboratory focuses on sea level rise, increased hurricane frequency, and rising temperatures on coastal wetland form and function. Then we have Jeffrey Alexander. Hello. He's the Deputy Director of Emergency Management for St. Johns County, focusing on serving the community through emergency planning, training, and prevention. And next we have Brian Carter. He's an environmental consultant and the principal of Carter Environmental Services, where his work includes environmental permitting, wetland delineation, protected animal species surveys, and so much more. And then last but not least, we have Scott Eastman over there. He is the stewardship coordinator here at the GTM Research Reserve. His team efforts provide stewardship to the vast estuaries and the salt marsh and the mangrove habitats within the reserve, as well as the portion of the marine habitat that falls within the reserve's boundary and the Northeast Florida Aquatic Reserves. All right, so let's get started. This question is interesting to me because I find it very interesting. I have a lot of friends that aren't as interested in science as I am, per se. So those of us with scientific educations and backgrounds, we tend to take it for granted that everyone thinks scientifically, right? And they're trying to make the best rational decisions based on the data that we have. Now, although there's a large portion of our society that doesn't have a big scientific background. So the big question is, how do we educate those people to get them interested in science and to make the best decisions, I guess, for society and the decisions, the people that are actually making the decisions as well in our governments.
That's a $1 million question, right? Okay, so I'll start off. As a scientist and as an educator, probably one of the biggest challenges we have is getting, maybe heavy information out to the public, so that not only can they make decisions, but that our decision makers, those officials, can do it also. It's actually a really big challenge. Part of maybe 25% of my time is spent trying to disseminate information in digestible ways. You have your technical talk, and then you have your kind of broader picture. I think we just saw a really good talk that did that a few minutes ago. I have to give props to our plenary speaker, because that was a really good example of how to do that, how to translate some highly technical information into digestible stuff for others. But it's probably the most challenging part of my job, too. I would say that because there's so much, as a scientist, you kind of try to be really objective, and then there's subjectivity when you get to topics that can be emotional or charged in public. So that's probably a I would say that the part that I'm least comfortable with. Trying to remain subjective or objective in those kind of scenarios. So that's probably a big place of friction between the science community and the public.
People thinking that maybe science is being used to advance a political agenda rather
Absolutely.
than just looking at the data. Does anyone else have anything to say?
I'll add a little bit. I think some of it's also visual. So, for one thing, seeing the environments, like the presentations and the videos that Jeremy was showing as well, but also kind of the behind the scenes, letting them know that these scientists are people, like seeing them out in the field. So short videos, short images, those types of things I think are really beneficial.
And I have to say, I mean, obviously it starts with the youth, with education, so that they understand basic science, so that when they see visual, like he's just describing, I mean, pictures worth 1,000 words, when they see a quick visual, they can comprehend it.
From our perspective, our biggest concern is teaching people what a reliable source is. It's the biggest joke in the world. I read it on the internet. It must be true. We work with public safety. We use science to determine when people are in danger, and they use the internet to make the argument that they're not. And that's really not healthy. So our concerns are mostly focused on trying to get people to understand you have to use a reliable source. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. And we actually have evidence of people who go out there to try to fool people. They make data and information, looks like it comes from the news station or the weather service, trying to make it look authentic to say things that are actually opposite of what we say. So finding a good, reliable source is what we try and direct people to, because we believe people can make good decisions if they're properly educated.
I'm an engineer as well as a scientist, and I used to live in Melbourne Beach, lived there for 15 years, and the people who would come and buy beachfront were often totally ignorant of what they were getting into. And I almost have this fantasy that in order to buy a beachfront property, you have to pass a test. You have to read a brochure. To operate a boat, you got to go online and take the online course and that sort of thing. And just to sit and understand the specifics of the property that you're considering buying is a big issue. Some properties are quite safe. The house is well back from the primary dune. You've got 3 dunes in front of you. You're pretty safe. Then you're in South Ponte Beach or Delano Beach, and you're butt up against A1A, and you're trying to put in a seawall that doesn't last through the first hurricane that hits it. That really is where the rubber hits the road. And that's when you get people upset. Yeah, my house is going to fall in the water. You need to build me a beach nourishment project. And that's not Joe Blow's responsibility, who lives 20 miles inland. So I really, and tongue in cheek, but I think you really need to educate any person who wants to build beachfront, who wants to live beachfront.
And they're surprised when their house is falling in the ocean, right? Well, so speaking of some of these recent storm events, like Matthew, like Irma, there's a lot of different moving parts: city, county, academia, agencies, and then the community. What have they done well with these recent events, and what do you think still needs a little more help? And I know there's a whole lot to this, but then, what do we need to, I guess, address for future risks? I think one of the most important things, some of the most important.
We're beginning to learn in coastal engineering with our beach nourishment projects. I was shocked when I first moved here to Jacksonville and saw what Jacksonville Beach looked like back in the 1970s. They were throwing washing machines and old cars in front of their houses trying to protect them. And Jacksonville Beach is now a completely man-made beach. And they nourish it every year, or not every 6 or 7 years or so. And now I lost my train of thought.
It went from, so Jacksonville Beach didn't have dunes basically, and now
Right.
it's all man-made. They were renourishing it every few years.
Okay, thank you. So what we've learned is the typical beach design maybe 10 years ago was to have a very wide berm where everyone could lay out their towel and lots of people could congregate. And the dune wasn't such a big player. And now, especially after Sandy and Irma and Matthew, and the 04 hurricane season, which still affects my life financially. They're beginning to put more emphasis on building the dune as opposed to building a berm, because the dune is much better at holding water back than the lower berm. So that's one thing that we've learned that is beginning to find its way into practice in designing beach nourishment projects.
I'd like to say that I think since these two storms have hit our community here, we have two really important things happen. One, the interest from the public perspective has gone way up, right? So we've had a taste of it, right? I'm talking about climate change and sea level rise and all of these issues that seem to be kind of politicized in our mainstream media. But now our local community is very engaged in that, and that's good. Which means now as scientists, we have an opportunity to do that, educating, but also for people to make choices about, well, do we want to learn about that? Do we want to research that and study it, or do we want to respond quickly? Looking back at the historic responses we've had in the past, learning from that is a really big issue too. And so I think, although there's been a lot of negativity associated with those two storms that hit our local area, as Matthew and Irma, I think we've had an opportunity to do this kind of thing, in a very open way of looking for reliable information and ways to figure out better solutions to the problems we have. So I think that's a plus. There's been a lot of negative too.
I think social media has a big thing to do with what you're talking about too. It's just people are so engaged in it, and images, again, visual. Pictures speak 1,000 words, and just people being able to see what's actually happening with these storms, live affected. We have the issue with forecasting, not to call him out back there, but Richard Nunn. Hey. I think that the problem is, or Mark Collins over there, hey. We have an issue in broadcast especially, is that it's not affecting my house, it's not a big deal. But with Matthew and Irma, there's so much more conversation that people are realizing these are big, massive storms, not just a severe thunderstorm over their house. So, anything to add that we could do better?
Well, I can certainly, there are just several things to talk about. The question leads directly into the first question, or follows from it very nicely. The understanding that the storms that we just experienced didn't hit us.
Yeah, right.
So many people believe, well, we've been hit by a hurricane, and all I have to do is put a little more sand in front of my house, I'll be good. No, it missed you. And you got a little taste of what it could do, and you could see how much it pulled away from our coastline, how many trees and buildings it knocked down, how much sand we lost. What we really hit, it would be 10 times more than that. And people have a hard time visualizing that. They don't, even someone who's studied it for 30 years, it's hard to visualize what happens if we lose 10 times what we lost. So someone who is trying to build their life back deals with what they can see. And convincing them that what we saw this morning, this is a global thing. What you're doing right here doesn't affect what's happening globally, and you can be wasting your time, energy, and money to try and do what you think is going to help. These things happen over hundreds and thousands of years. You can build on the coast now, you can have a house for the next 50 years. 51 years from now, you need to rethink that. Do you need to move the house, abandon it, reinforce it? But you can't expect these things to last forever. And what we do now, and how we educate the population on where are you safe? I always come back to where are you safe, it's kind of what I do. Where are you safe? Where can you live safely? And if it's no longer safe, it's really not a good idea. I mean, we can replace everything. We can replace sand, we can replace houses, cars, possessions, but we only have one of you, and we want to keep that. So as long as we can. So we have to keep people safe, and understanding where the safety line can be drawn is important for everybody. And they look at what they've learned, and the government, the news media, and the community aren't helping by saying, yeah, when we were hit by Matthew, we weren't. When we were hit by Irma, we weren't. It gives people this false understanding. When we had the impacts from Matthew, when we had the impacts from Irma, which could have been worse. Is it better terminology? Is it easier to say? No. Is it more accurate? Yes. But how do we teach that and get a vernacular going with the community so that they're all moving in the right direction?
Great. Yeah. I after Matthew, I got sucked into a lot of homeowners along Ponte Vedra and Volano Beach that wanted what we all want. We all want. The question is always, how much does it cost and how long does it take? That's what I deal with all the time because I work on behalf of a lot of private property owners. In this instance, going to what these other gentlemen have said, it's not a matter of money and it's not a matter of time. It's a matter of that they shouldn't be there. It's not a safe place. So if you're willing to understand that, and if you're willing to live in the risk, then that's one thing. But part of the other problem was, going back to what Dr. Zadali, they should have some sort of test that they fill out if they want to live in an unsafe environment. No, I mean, we laugh. But if they live in an unsafe, if you deem that the county's deemed that unsafe, based on engineering and scientific research, then they should have a form that they fill out that it no longer becomes the burden of the guy that lives 20 miles inland to pay. People genuinely thought that. They really, really did. That it was everybody's burden. And so, obviously, as a community, it's important that we recognize where those unsafe areas are and that we try to get the word out that they are unsafe areas, and then that liability needs to be understood.
It's like when you're signing a form to go on a roller coaster or something. It's like, yeah, I know my risks.
Something you just said made me think, maybe we should be leasing beachfront property for 50 years. After 50 years, we'll decide whether you can still live there or not.
There's examples in front of me. I think Hawaii did something similar to that as well. Well, I'm thinking, just from this conversation, this is good. I think a negative that we're doing is still kind of looking at this reactively. I think a lot of us in this room and as well in this panel kind of knew this has been a long-term problem. Beaches have been eroding. We know we're critically eroded. It was just these storms that were kind of that tipping point. So we haven't been looking at this as kind of the long shot of where this is coming. So I think we need to address that more in the time series.
And like we said, that's hard to do because we weren't really hit, right? So I guess then keeping the combo going with these storms, to move forward, do you guys see any changes in the way that communities are being built? I mean, for example, driving down A1A, seeing what's happening to the homes that are being rebuilt or sold, or you name it. What can we do then to make our communities more sustainable and stronger? I think we've touched on it a little, but
Yeah, I shake my head.
The simple
The long story. After Matthew, we took all of our graduate students and created a special topics course where we studied Matthew in three components. One was we had one group modeling Matthew with the best numerical models that we had available. group that inspected the beachfront properties and identifies specific ones to focus in on, and how they were hit, and then how the owner was trying to recover. And we had a third group who handled the docks back in the St. Johns River. There were already people in trouble. In fact, the parents of one of my graduate students owned the beachfront in North Alano Beach, and they knew they were in trouble, and they were trying to get a permit to build a seawall from DEP before Matthew came along, and they were denied. And Matthew hit, and they were allowed to build a seawall. And the seawall they built was plastic, and the plastic was not meant to take waves. And so the National Science Foundation, after Matthew, asked a bunch of us, scientists came from Maine to survey the beach, and I was just appalled as an engineer as to how badly these plastic seawalls had performed during the storm. And it's a waste of money, a waste of emotion, and one of these people who built these plastic seawalls were the parents of my graduate student. I happened to run into him. He was out inspecting his property, or what was left of it, after the storm, when we came walking down the beach. And I'm just embarrassed as an engineer that such a thing got hurt. But that's what happened. Repeatedly. It's all knee-jerk reaction to the trouble I'm in. After the 04 hurricanes, I was very busy in Brevard County, and people were just scurrying, how do we get a beach nourishment project? Oh, it takes 8 years to get a beach nourishment project built, so it's not going to happen fast. Anyway, leave it at that.
I'd like to say one thing about responsibility. And when we're talking about this, I think as an information provider, my role is to provide information, right? Scientifically rigorous information so people can make decisions. That being said, I have a lot of sympathy for folks that are in that situation. I mean, it's a tremendous one, right? A financial situation, a life-changing event. But we know how barrier islands work, how coastlines work. And I'll use an example that's not so far from that, is wildfire. You see the fire problems out west, right? There's fire, there's fuel management problems, and there's also homeowners that don't take don't heed the advice given about safety clearance of vegetation around their houses, maintaining that fuel load, things like that. And so I look at them kind of parallel, is that the information is there. We have some understanding, yet we have this kind of self-enforced neglect that occurs, where we say, okay, well, hurricane's coming, or our storm has a potential to wreck our oceanfront property, we're going to do it anyway. And so I think part of the conversation we need to have is that there's responsibility of the individual property owner to take that burden upon themselves and do the best they can given the information we have.
I think it was pretty clear this morning. The doctor indicated, why do people live at the beach? Because it's beautiful. I live 7.136 miles from the beach. Why? Because that's as close as I can live to the beach and still feel as though if I'm not home during a hurricane, my family's safe. But I still live 7 miles from the coast. A hurricane is 30 miles wide. 7 miles means nothing to a hurricane. So we have to change something that's almost impossible to change. It takes hundreds of years to change, and that is our concept that I'm going to hand my house down to my kids so that they can live here and hand it down to their kids. Some of where we live is white bread. I buy a loaf of white bread every couple of days because I really like white bread sandwiches. But eventually, I have to give up that loaf of bread because it doesn't have preservatives in it and it goes bad. I have to throw it away and get a new one. And our homes are not going to last for hundreds of years. The water's not going away from the home, it's coming towards it. The world around us is changing. We have to accept, our society has to learn that our community, as we envision it, is in a state of change. And we have to allow that change to happen. Again, you can build on the coast, but accept that that home may not be here 50 years from now. You can build 7 miles from the coast and accept that 100 years from now, your great-grandkids may not be able to live there. But the problem is, how do you change a mentality of an entire community into an understanding without oversimplifying it? Because you can't, because when you oversimplify it, it becomes a trendy thing that's great for a short period of time and then dies off. It has to become part of our culture to understand some things are fleeting. And fleeting in terms of the community can be 50, 100, 150, 200 years. Long after we're gone, our great-great-grandchildren will be seeing what we think they'll be seeing, but we don't even know that. So it's that social consciousness of the community. A community develops a sense of place. This is what our community is, and they don't like it to change. That's why we put the sand back on the beach. We spent 8 years trying to find the funding, moving the sand up there, and then one storm comes by and takes it all away. Because we want our community to stay the same. And I'm sure some anthropologist out there has probably figured out why we want our community to stay the same. I know in the 600s, a community would build where it could build, and then when the environment got nasty, they moved to over here. So somewhere in the last 1,200 years, we've become less mobile. And we want our society to stay where it is. We've got to get a little bit of what we used to be back, and understanding we can't always just stay and it can't stay the same.
I'd like to comment on that because I think that's a really good point. You know, even less than 100 years ago, there wasn't a lot of development on the coastline. You know, I was reading this interesting book about Matanzas Inlet, or about the Summer Haven community down there. And people would build little fish shacks on the inside of the river and go there for the weekend, or just to escape, and then leave, because they recognized that at any given day a storm come along and take that away, right? And that was that way for a long time. Even when St. Augustine was developed as a city, for hundreds of years, people would go across the river and walk over to the beach for the day and come back. I read a really great book about Melbourne Beach. Along the I-95 corridor was an access up and down the East Coast, and then little towns would pop up on the west side of the Indian River Lagoon. But there wasn't really any development on the Berry Bottom because it was too risky. I mean, no one would go out there and build a house and try to live there and then lose their house and be homeless. So that's kind of a new construct for us, and we don't see an easy path to reverse that process, right?
Right, well, if you ask me, nobody should live within 5 miles of the coast.
That'd make your job a lot
Just
easier.
imagine how easy my job would be if I had to convince everybody who had to evacuate that was within 5 miles of the coast. But 70% of our population in Florida lives within 10 miles of the coast. There's a reason for that. We want to live near the coast. I had a point I was going to make, but I lost it. You laughed at my joke.
I want to jump in on the permitting regulation side, because that's what I deal with 65 hours a week. So on the permitting the seawalls, it's interesting. Obviously, we all recognize that there's a political climate and then there's a regulatory climate, and many times those XY axes they intersect, So in the seawall issue, what's behind, and let's talk regionally where we are right here. What's behind those houses that are A1A? And so when DOT is the Florida Department of Transportation and DEP is the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, they're all in this capital, Tallahassee, and they're talking. Hey, let those people spend the money and buy us time because the next one that's coming is A1A, and then we're going to have to deal with it. So there's obviously on the permitting side, there's the political and regulatory climate. There's some other things that we're doing. It's interesting. Is there a knee-jerk reaction? Sure, there's a knee-jerk. I mean, we're seeing it as we drive, here today. But things that the regulations don't have that same kind of knee-jerk reaction as maybe, and maybe they shouldn't. But perfect example is intercoastal docks or river docks. I do a lot of dock permitting. The regulations are 5 feet above mean high water. About 3 or 4 years ago, through listening and studying about climate change and sea level rise, I was thinking 5 feet's not enough. There's a huge tidal variance. I mean, I see it. I'm out in that river at least every weekend, and I live within 7 houses of the marsh, not on the ocean side, but on the downtown St. Augustine side. And I mean, I see the tide, and I've lived there for 17 years, and I've seen the tide come way up more than it ever has back into our streets. So I started telling our clients, look, build 6 to 7 feet above mean high water for your docks. The docks that were built over the last few years that we did that on, they were fine during Irma and Matthew. Most of the other docks were trash. And of course, for docks, for those of you who don't know, docks is it's 10% of the cost of the dock annually to insure. So most people don't insure them. They have to pay to rebuild them, and they're expensive. I mean, they're 80 grand, 120 grand. So, that's one of the things. Obviously, we've seen a lot of conversation from FEMA on finished floor elevations of homes. A lot of damage that was done was obviously below the 9. People will say, in short conversation, I'm at 9 or I'm at 10, so I'm good. Right? Can you hear that? Right. So the FEMA's talking about going to 10. I don't know if that happened yet. That was supposed to happen. Hasn't happened yet. I was heard it was supposed to happen in February. The other issue in regulation is, stormwater ponds for rainwater versus tidally influenced water. It's a big difference. Tidally influenced water can't be handled with a pond, so to speak. It's coming in over top and flooding in. And we've all seen that. But there's been a lot of attention to that in the regulatory permitting side and the civil engineering side, and how to deal with that. Well, typically how to deal with it is, okay, so finished floor on FEMA is 9. Well, let's make it 11. Well, there's major implications to that because there's affordability issues. I mean, you start putting sand on these barrier islands that are at 4 feet and you're bringing it up to 9 or 10. I mean, my house was built in 1947. It's on 4-foot piers, concrete piers over grade and more efficient. And I didn't flood during Irma, Matthew, but it could, get underneath if it had to. That's all I wanted to mention.
All right. Wow. I kind of want to summarize in this kind of this balance. It is challenging because I look at the panel and it really does look like the elephant in the room is we're thinking about coastal retreat as an only option. And we know that in time it may be, but I'll try to add some positivity as well too. As we're talking with Todd, a lot of this is buying time. It's buying sand, it's buying plants, it's having native plantings in areas that can actually recruit. Jeremy in his talk was talking about these sand sources that may be in the near shore environment. So it's as simple as trying to get some of that to naturally displace in these areas rather than having them locked up within these barriers. But again, I think, as we mentioned down the line, it's buying time, so eventually we will be looking at this.
So then that's our next question. Let's just raise our hands, yes or no. Let's make it interactive here. Should people leave coastal areas and live elsewhere? Yes or no? It's not an easy answer. All right, explain yourselves.
I'll answer it. No.
No.
Yeah, I advocate retreat, but I advocate retreat over the next 50, 100, 200 years. And I remember my point from earlier. If it ever was up to me, from a public safety standpoint, nobody would live within 5 miles of the coast. From a developer standpoint, from an economic standpoint, everybody wants to live within 5 miles of the coast. And let's face it, my favorite quote of all time, J.P. Morgan, it's about the money, stupid. What generates money? Building on the coast, paying taxes from the coast, visiting the coast. That builds that society that we like. We do love community. That's why we all live huddled together in cities and in counties and government. So, no, we shouldn't retreat from the coast, but we should be realistic about how long the coast will be where it is. And understand that, because there's a pressure to build out there, but there's a world they taught me in 6th grade earth science. The job of the ocean is to make the world flat, and the job of the mountains is to build it back up. So if you're up there by the coast, the world is trying to make your house flat. So we have to understand that. And, you know, everything I learned in elementary school. So we have to find that balance. It's all about finding that balance and developing a community thought process that's not, okay, everything along the coast was destroyed. And I love this one. I see it all the time. We have to help those people get their lives back the way they were. No, that's not going to help. We have to build it back so that it will last the next 50 years. And what does that mean? That means some people aren't going to get their houses back. Why? Because their land is in the ocean now. And you can't build on the ocean. Well, you can, but it really costs a lot of money. And getting sewer out there is just so complicated. So the idea is we have to help build the community back better, not help those poor people get their houses back and their lives back the way they were. Now, please don't believe that I believe that we shouldn't help people. It's kind of what I do. My job is to help people. But I'm not helping them if I'm putting them back in danger and putting them in a situation where they're going to lose even more next time. Because if you're still paying off this storm, when the next storm hits and tears your house down again, now you've over 3 houses and you have none. So I'm not helping you. Helping you is helping you to realize the best thing for you to do is build in a better, safer place. And that might mean on the other side of the road. And if we can build a society to understand that, because my heart bleeds for everybody too. I donate money to those causes. Every time somebody has a disaster, we've got to help those people get their lives back. It's just how do we define back? And as a society, it means get you back to where you were, and we need to change that to get you back to a better place.
I'll add a little bit. I think this brings us back to Bill's original statement with education.
Yes.
Because I mean, I'm guilty of it. I live less than a quarter mile from the coast. That's why I moved here.
I don't believe you should move away.
Yeah, I will eventually, probably. But I think a lot of it is knowing. It's like you said, it's this education of knowing what's going on, knowing what our surroundings are, knowing these long-term trends. Because like I said, we can say it's hurricanes, but this is long-term. And we're going to see what's going to happen in, like I said, 50 years, 100 years. We'll have a totally different landscape here, I'm sure.
Right.
Back to the questionnaire, folks living on the coast, sounds like you've taken your stuff. Does anyone else have anything to add? Should people move off the coast?
I did a lot of work in coastal Mississippi after Katrina, and I was hired by State Farm Insurance because there were a lot of people double dipping on their insurance. Their flood insurance paid for their loss of their house, and then they turned around and said, "Oh no, it was the wind that destroyed my house." And so State Farm hired every expert they could find and they had to go house by house. So I was claimed to be the expert witness for maybe 50 houses, and in going to inspect each site, I looked around, and a lot lot of the sites were simply 10-foot high sticks. And of almost of the hundreds of houses that I looked around, I saw 3 that actually increased the length of their sticks, so that they could maybe make it past the next storm. So again, it's an issue of, I've got insurance, they'll pay for, I've been paying big bucks for this insurance, and they'll pay for me to rebuild. So some of the pressure has to come from the insurance industry as well. I'm not going to allow you, I'm not going to insure you to build your house back where it is in North Delano Beach. And it's unfortunate. It's a lot of money just gone. But you're not doing them any favors by letting them put it back the way it was.
Well, I mean, I'll add. I mean, we all know that it's not a matter of if; it's just a matter of when. And we had 2 wins in the last 2 years, and that one being the direct win. And so, I mean, educating people on where they're the most vulnerable, and if they're, as a community, do we? I had written this, and I wasn't going to say it, but I'm going to say it now. I think the resources that we're spending on hardening surfaces, hardening edges, to put people back to resume life as it was, future generations are going to laugh at us. I mean, it doesn't make sense. We have to change. Dr. Stalker, we have to change. We're in the middle of this stasis. Nothing stays the same. That's the only constant is change. So we have to change. Our communities have to evolve, and it's not just rebuilding back to the way it was. I mean, I'm not saying people necessarily need to move, but my finished floor is at 11, and I'm genuinely contemplating lifting my house up. And I'm on the top of what I call Fullerwood Hill, where I live in my neighborhood, and I'm contemplating it. Because what's going to happen is if I do it, people around my neighborhood, because they know what I do, and they'll be like, "You're at the top of the hill." I'm like, "Yeah, I bought on the top of the hill for a reason, and I didn't." And people always say that, "Oh, you're in that neighborhood. Oh, gosh, they flooded really bad." And I say, "Oh, I didn't flood." Well, wow, that's awesome. You lucked out. I'm like, "Well, I'm a nerd about this stuff. I'm like, I'm on the top of the hill." But yeah, I mean, if you said, "Okay, yeah, you could stay, and yeah, we'll insure you, but we want your finished floor at 14." And that if they were willing to do that because the next one comes and it flooded underneath, then I think that's fine to stay. I don't have a problem with it. Can we engineer ourselves out of all of it? No. But can we make modifications to structures to allow us to stay there? And when happens, then we would be better prepared.